Good evening and welcome to Gravitas. I'm Palki, Sharma, Upadhyay. Let's get started.
Introduction of a central bank will also lead to a more
India is the fastest growing economy in the world, also the sixth largest. Today, India presented its annual budget, the government did. If you were hoping for a tax cut, it would have been disappointing. If you were hoping for more cash in hand today, it would have been disappointing because this budget is looking at the future. It talks about themes and issues that will shape our tomorrow. Not grand populist allocations or SOPs. This budget talks about climate change, mental health, startups, capacity building, digital currency, e-passports. Like I said, it is futuristic. On Gravitas tonight, we'll bring you the highlights, the 10 big things you must know about India's Union Budget 2022, the hits and the misses. Also on the show, the UAE is no longer tax-free. In a first, the tax haven has introduced a federal corporate tax. Will it hurt businesses? Will they be forced to shift base? We will explore. India abstains from the United Nations Security Council vote on Ukraine. New Delhi refuses to pick sides in a crisis that has divided much of Europe and the world. The Maldives is planning a new law to ban anti-India protests. We'll tell you all about it on the show tonight. Also, another country adopts the right to disconnect. Is a new law enough? Or does the corporate world also need a new mindset? We'll talk about it. We begin as always with Gravitas Global Headlines.
US President Joe Biden has said he plans to designate Qatar as a major non-NATO ally during his meeting with Qatar's Emir, Sheikh Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani, at the White House.
I'm notifying Congress that I will designate Qatar as a major non-NATO ally.
A special status grant will open the doors for closer military and commercial ties. Marking 1 year since the military seized power in Myanmar and plunged the country into chaos, the United States, Britain and Canada have imposed sanctions against several officials of the country. Meanwhile, dozens of protesters hit the streets in Yangon, chanting slogans against the military rule. The European Commission has said the expulsion of France's ambassador to Mali is unjustified and will lead to the country being further cut off from EU member states. Mali on Monday gave the French ambassador 72 hours to leave the country, following comments by France about its transitional government. United States President Joe Biden has called on the Taliban to release an American civil engineer who was abducted 2 years ago. The U.S. Navy veteran worked on development projects in Afghanistan for a decade. A week after the military in Burkina Faso deposed the president Roch Kabore and suspended the constitution, the coup's leader has been appointed as the head of state for a transitional period. Food inflation in crisis hit Sri Lanka has hit a record 25% in January, with crop failures and difficulties in financing imports leading to widespread shortages. A major oil spill in eastern Ecuador has reached a nature reserve and polluted a river that supplies water to indigenous communities. The country's environmental ministry has described it as a major pollution event. Strong winds due to Storm Corrie forced a British Airways plane travelling from Aberdeen to abort an attempt to land at London's Heathrow Airport. The storm caused wind gusts of up to 75 miles per hour in the North Sea. 10 players will be part of the marquee set that will ring in the 2022 IPL Mega Auction, which is scheduled for February 12th and 13th in Bengaluru. These 10 players include the likes of Australian Test captain Pat Cummins and David Warner, as well as Indian internationals Shreyas Iyer and Mohammad Shami. A flurry of big money moves before the transfer deadline took Premier League spending to the second highest ever for a winter window. More than $350 million were spent in total in January. Tottenham signed the duo of Dejan Kulusevski and Rodrigo Bentancur, while Brentford completed the signing of Christian Eriksen.
It was budget day in India today. Emerging from the shadow of the pandemic, India is aiming for 9.27% growth. The target is to become a $5 trillion economy. It's not easy given the recurring waves of the Wuhan virus. What the economy needed was a booster shot of bold reforms. Has the union budget delivered that? Tonight we'll tell you the 10 things you should know about this budget. And then we'll discuss if this is a futuristic budget that can propel growth. Highlight number 1, India will not ban digital assets. Instead, India will tax them. Last year, there were reports that the government could ban all forms of cryptocurrencies, assets like Bitcoin and Ethereum. India doesn't have a law to regulate them yet. Today, Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman said digital assets will be taxed at the rate of 30%.
For the taxation of virtual digital assets, I propose to provide that any income from transfer of any virtual digital asset shall be taxed at the rate of 30%, 30%.
A 30% tax on all digital assets, which includes everything, cryptocurrencies, NFTs or non-fungible tokens. There are no exemptions here. What kind of tax is this? It's on income or transfer of assets. So if you make profits by investing in crypto, or if you transfer these assets to another person, you will pay a tax of 30%. Now this is bittersweet news for investors. Bitter because they will be taxed now, and sweet because the assets will not be banned. This move is a signal that India is going to regulate crypto, not ban it. Highlight number 2, the digital rupee. India is getting its very own digital currency. The Reserve Bank of India will issue it in the new financial year. That's 2022-23.
Introduction of a central bank digital currency will give a big boost to digital economy. Digital currency will also lead to a more efficient and cheaper currency management system.
So we'll have the Indian rupee on an Indian blockchain. How many countries have this? 9 so far. India wants to be on that list, and this would mean fundamental changes in the Indian financial system. Highlight number 3, income tax. No change there. You can see it as the glass half full or the glass half empty. You will be paying the same income tax as last year. What has changed is how you file those tax returns. You can now file an updated return within 2 years. So if you get it wrong the first time, you can fix it within 2 years. Highlight number 4, major connectivity push. India wants to spend big on infra, 20,000 crore rupees. That's more than $2 billion. This is the Prime Minister's Gati Shakti plan to facilitate faster transfer of goods, speed up cargo movement and improve the logistics network. This money will be spent on roads, railways, airports, ports, mass transport, waterways and logistics infrastructure. The biggest spending will be on national highways. In the next 3 years, India wants to build 400 new trains and 100 cargo terminals. India plans to spend a whopping $100 billion on infrastructure. That's 35% more than 2021 and double of what India spent before the pandemic. And this is direct spending, meaning the government will foot the bills for all these projects. Infrastructure projects of all kinds will benefit from this move. Highlight number 6, Make in India is getting a boost in defense. There is marginal increase in the defense budget. The allocation this year is 5.25 lakh crore rupees. That's more than $60 billion. It's an increase of almost 5% from last year. But the bulk of the budget will go to Indian manufacturers. 68% of the procurement will happen from domestic players. 25% has been set aside for research and development. A large chunk of this money is going to go towards upgrades. Also being upgraded is the Indian passport. That's highlight number 7. Starting this year, Indians will be issued e-passports. They were first announced in 2019. and they were rolled out. So far, 20,000 officials and diplomats have been issued e-passports. Now, you and I will be able to get one. How will this passport be different? It comes with a chip, a small silicon chip embedded on the back of the passport. This chip will contain all the necessary information like your name, your address, your passport number, plus data on your last 30 visits. More than 100 countries have such passports. Highlight number 8. Upgrading India's mobile networks. 5G is coming next year. Spectrum will be auctioned this year. India also wants to become a hub for 5G manufacturing. Incentives have been announced for equipment makers. Plus, there is also a proposal to bring internet to Indian villages. The government is going to award contracts to lay optical fiber cables around the country. Which brings us to highlight number 9. Digital education. It is getting a major push in this budget. India plans to develop a digital university. The finance minister said it will provide students with world-class education. There is another proposal called eVidya. Under this, the government of India had earlier set up 12 TV channels to teach students. This will now be expanded to 200 channels. The idea is to provide supplementary education in different regional languages. Highlight number 10. The budget talked about mental health, which is a rare issue to be taken up in a union budget. The finance minister said the Wuhan virus outbreak has accentuated mental health problems across age groups, so India will launch a national tele-mental health program.
To better the access to quality mental health counseling and care services, a national tele-mental health program will be launched, with NIMHANS being the nodal center and International Institute of Information Technology, Bangalore, IIIT Bangalore, providing technology support.
So that was the budget. Can it make India a $5 trillion economy? Well, that's our next story. Budgets can be transformative. You know what happens on budget day? Every Indian becomes an economist. Investments, deficit, disinvestment, you'll hear a lot of those big words being thrown around. But at the end of the day, two things matter, what worked and what did not. This union budget was no different in that respect. We've identified 6 things that worked this year. Number 1 is the focus on new sectors. Mental health, gaming, animation. Usually these things never make it to the budget. This year they did. India is setting up a special task force to harness gaming and animation. How to build domestic capacity. What does the market need? This task force will discuss all of that. Not only is this a new money-spinning sector, it is also something that the youth understand, something they're good at. Number 2, the green push. Around 19,500 crores have been allocated for making solar modules, not directly, but as incentives. The government has also announced a green bond and a national battery swapping scheme. It's like a green pivot in the budget. India wants to be carbon neutral by 2070, and for that, the budget must reflect green ambitions. Number 3, self-sufficiency in defense. Again, very important. Until now, India has been a buyer in the defense market. Self-sufficiency is the first step towards becoming a seller. First, you supply your own army, and then you sell abroad. By doing this, India can save money and gain strategic edge. Number 4, a neighborhood outreach. We rarely talk about this aspect of the budget. Overall, the Indian Foreign Ministry has been given 17,000 crore rupees. Out of this, aid is dispersed to multiple countries. 2,200 crores for Bhutan, 200 crores for Afghanistan, 300 for Bangladesh, 750 for Nepal, 360 for the Maldives, and 600 crores for Myanmar. These donations reaffirm India's commitment to South Asia. Remember, Afghanistan has a Taliban government now. Myanmar has a military junta. Yet both countries are getting aid from India. What does this tell you? That India's commitment is to the people, not the regimes. Number 5, a red carpet for international universities. India is inviting them to set up campuses in Gujarat. What will they teach? Financial management, fintech, science and technology, engineering. What is special about these universities? Domestic regulations will not apply to them. They will follow international norms and standards. It means more opportunities for the youth, more skilled labor for the Indian economy. Number 6, a targeted budget approach. Now, this is more of a cultural change, you could say. Just think about budgets of the past. What do you remember about them? A dozen populist schemes, massive allocations, and incomprehensible numbers. This year it was different. The focus was not on big-ticket projects. The focus was on direction. A roadmap to becoming a $5 trillion economy. In the past, that was not the case. We considered the budget to be a financial silver bullet. Announce projects, allocate money, and implement them for the rest of the year. But times have changed. Today, most of the work is done outside the budget. The government lays out the direction. The economy follows. That's what happens in most countries. Take startups, for instance. They're emerging as the new engines of India's growth. Today, the government offered them new tax benefits. If your startup is incorporated before March 2023, you will get 100% tax rebate for 3 years. Earlier, the eligibility was until March 2021. It has now been extended. Plus, the credit line for small enterprises has been expanded. In total, 5 lakh crore is available for such firms. So broadly speaking, this budget focuses on 2 things, stability and new frontiers. We are tentatively emerging from a pandemic, so tinkering too much would have been counterproductive, like major tax upheavals or massive spending programs. The key now is stability, because remember, growth is a marathon, not a sprint. At the same time, the budget reflects the new India. There was focus on games, animation, mental health, climate change. These are programs for the future. You won't see dividends today or tomorrow. It's about investing both money and patience. Does that mean this was a perfect budget? Of course not. A perfect budget does not exist. Some will cheer it, some will criticize it. For instance, you could argue that there is little relief for the middle class. Around 85% of India's working population suffered financially during the pandemic. They could have used a tax cut. Also, disinvestment. In the last budget, the target was 1.75 lakh crores. This year, 65,000 crores. Is this a case of setting realistic expectations or a larger pivot in policy? We'll have to wait for those answers. Like I said, no budget is perfect. It's all about your expectations, your current economic atmosphere, and your overall political direction. In that sense, this budget does the job. It provides stability today, plus sets the foundation for tomorrow. Both the Prime Minister and the Finance Minister made that clear.
ये बजट more infrastructure, more investment, more growth और more jobs की नई संभावनाओं से भरा हुआ है। और एक नया क्षेत्र और खुला है और वो है ग्रीन जॉब्स का। ये बजट तत्कालीन आवश्यकताओं का भी समाधान करता है और देश के युवाओं के उज्जवल भविष्य को भी सुनिश्चित करता है।
This year marks the 75th year of India's independence. The budget is a blueprint for the next 25 years. What India will look like at 100 years of independence. It's a delicate balance. Whether it will work or not, only time, as they say, will tell. And speaking of, for the longest time, the USP, or the unique selling point of the UAE, was its tax-free status. The United Arab Emirates is losing that now. Starting June 2023, corporates in the UAE will be asked to pay a federal tax. Will this force businesses to move base? Will Dubai no longer remain attractive to entrepreneurs? And why is the UAE suddenly introducing a tax after all these years? Our next report has the answers.
It's hard to get this skyline wrong. This is the United Arab Emirates, home to ultra-rich people. Ultra-fast cars, ultra-tall towers, ultra-luxurious airlines, and the coveted business hubs. There are at least 3,209 international companies in the UAE. Most of them are based in Dubai. What makes this land a favorable business destination? 1. Taxes. You don't need to pay any. 2. Ownership. Foreign companies do not need Emirati shareholding. And 3. Location. UAE is halfway between Europe and Asia. It's a magic formula for minting money. But soon, companies will be forced to share their profits. UAE has introduced its first ever corporate tax. Businesses will be taxed 9%. This will apply to profits exceeding 375,000 dirhams, which is around $102,000. Corporates whose profits are below $102,000 will not need to pay tax. This is a federal corporate tax, meaning it does not apply to individuals. Just businesses. They will have to start paying tax starting June 2023. This is the first time the UAE is taxing businesses directly. One can't help but ask why. Why is the UAE bent on losing its USP? Maybe to stay in the business. We did some digging. Here's what we think paved the way for this tax regime. 1. The need to be a team player. Countries worldwide want big corporates to pay a minimum of 15% tax. The proposal was put forward by the OECD, and 136 countries, including the UAE, signed on it in 2021. This corporate tax helps UAE do its bit in countering big tech's tax evasion. What it also does is save the UAE from grey listing. Point number 2 may come as a shock to some of you. Remember FATF, the Financial Action Task Force that's grey-listed Pakistan? It is now discussing whether or not to put the UAE in the same category. FATF reportedly believes the UAE has not done enough to combat money laundering. If grey-listed, the UAE's investments could take a hit. Taxing businesses, on the other hand, helps it build a case before the financial watchdog. Point number 3. Corporate tax also helps the UAE diversify its economy. Ever since the pandemic struck, oil-rich countries began pivoting away from over-reliance on petroleum. Saudi Arabia, for example, invested in an Indian retail chain. The UAE, too, is exploring different avenues of income. In 2018, the UAE introduced VAT, or value-added tax, on most goods and services. Currently, branches of foreign banks need to pay 20% tax, as do certain companies in the energy sector. What changes now is that other businesses too come under the tax bracket. There is a possible fallout of this move. The UAE may lose business, especially to Saudi Arabia. Riyadh has been offering incentive to international companies. It wants businesses to shift their offices. To be fair, the UAE still has an edge. For starters, most other Gulf countries impose corporate tax on MNCs too. In Saudi Arabia, it is 20%. In Oman, it is 15%, and 10% in Qatar. The UAE is proposing 9%. What about tax havens outside the Gulf? Montenegro's tax rate is 8%. Gibraltar, 10%. Hong Kong's taxes start at 8.5% and go up to 16.5%. The UAE's finance ministry has said that the country's corporate tax regime will be amongst the most competitive in the world. It's not like upsetting businesses is an option before the UAE. Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
We often tend to see conflicts as two-sided, left versus right, labor versus management, one country versus another. But what we often fail to see is a third side, not party to the conflict, but under pressure to pick favorites. Take the Russia-Ukraine conflict, for instance. It has divided much of Europe and the world. On one side, we have Russia and its allies like Belarus. On the other side, we have America and NATO member nations, apparently supporting Ukraine. They are locked in a conflict that can escalate into war, and they expect the rest of the world to take sides instead of helping settle the differences. India found itself in such a situation at the United Nations Security Council. Russia and America had a bitter dispute at the UNSC. It was followed by a vote. India abstained. Was it the right move? Should India have taken a stand for Ukraine, if not for the others? Is abstention also taking a stand? That's what we'll discuss tonight. On Monday, the UNSC met to discuss the Ukraine conflict. The meeting was requested by the US last week. It had all the theatrics of the Cold War. Russia painted the Americans as the aggressors. America accused the Russians of violating the UN Charter. There were angry debates, intense face-offs, even some walkouts. India steered clear of it. It abstained from a procedural vote, a vote on whether discussions were required over the threat of a Russian invasion into Ukraine. The UNSC has 15 member states. 10 countries voted in favor of the agenda, meaning they wanted a discussion on a possible Russian invasion. These countries included the US and its allies. 2 countries voted against a discussion. That's Russia and China. And 3 countries abstained: Kenya, Gabon and India. 9 votes were needed for this discussion to take place. 9 yeses. They had 10. So the discussions went ahead. India did not side with either bloc. India's permanent representative to the UN, Ambassador T.S. Tirumurthy, stressed on the need for dialogue. The statement called for an immediate de-escalation of tensions and reiterated support for a peaceful resolution of conflict. The ambassador said 20,000 Indian students and nationals live in Ukraine. Their safety is the top priority for India. His statement was by far New Delhi's most detailed position on the matter.
India's interest is in finding a solution that can provide for immediate de-escalation of tensions, taking into account the legitimate security interests of all countries and aimed towards securing long-term peace and stability in the region and beyond. Quiet and constructive diplomacy is the need of the hour. Any steps that increase tension may best be avoided by all sides in the larger interest of securing international peace and security. More than 20,000 Indian students and nationals live and study in different parts of Ukraine, including in its border areas. The well-being of Indian nationals is a priority to us.
Not my circus, not my monkeys. This may just be the most apt description of India's UNSC stance, a position which took into account India's national interest and commitment to a multipolar world. But critics say India's statement tilted towards the Russian position because an abstention is essentially not a yes, so it is seen as a negative vote. New Delhi's statement talked about the quote-unquote legitimate security interests of all countries. Now, this statement is being seen as a recognition of Russia's concerns over the presence of NATO in its neighborhood. And I'm not the one saying this, the Russians are. They welcomed India's position. Let me show you a tweet from a Russian diplomat called Dmitry Polyansky. He has thanked New Delhi for not supporting what he calls American hand twisting. It's another matter that he put India in the same bracket as China. Now, this was never going to be easy for New Delhi. It was always going to be tricky. If you don't take sides, if you don't weigh in on an international conflict, how do you aspire to be a global power? If you do take sides, which one do you pick? You have strategic partners on both sides of the divide. But then again, it's wise to pick your battles. You don't have to fight each one of them. New Delhi decided it did not want to pick this one. And India is not the only one that is trying to strike a balance and diffuse tensions. France is doing it too. President Emmanuel Macron held another phone call with Russian President Vladimir Putin. They discussed de-escalation and the need to keep diplomatic lines open at any cost. Britain is doing the exact opposite. Its Prime Minister Boris Johnson has decided to travel to Ukraine and hold talks with President Zelensky. Now, this is being seen as the UK's clear demonstration of support to Ukraine. Reports also say that this visit was announced immediately after Putin snubbed Johnson's phone call request. So there's a lot at play here. Countries safeguarding strategic interests, countries pushing their agenda and hoping others will support them, countries trying to diffuse tensions, a leader hoping to escape to Ukraine from a political conflict at home. This Ukraine story is going down to the wire. We'll be tracking it for you. Now, they say sorry is a magic word. If you want to reconcile with a friend or bury your past, just say sorry and work from there. But what if you failed an entire nation? Would sorry cut it? British Prime Minister Boris Johnson says yes. But his country says, not so fast. I'm talking about the Partygate scandal. When Britain was locked down, Downing Street was partying, not once or twice, but 16 times. The Prime Minister himself attended a few of them, so the opposition's demand was clear, say sorry and resign. But Boris Johnson was adamant. He said, let's wait for the Sugri report. Now, who's Sue Gray? She's a civil servant working at the Cabinet Office in London. Boris Johnson asked her to investigate the lockdown parties. On Monday, her report was published. It was a typical government assessment. You can smell the gunpowder, but you cannot see the smoking gun. Sue Gray does not take names in her report. She does not blame individuals either. What she does reveal is a culture of recklessness. Downing Street did not care about COVID restrictions. They did not care about the hardships of 70 million Britons. Let me quote from the Sue Gray report. Against the backdrop of the pandemic, when the government was asking citizens to accept far-reaching restrictions on their lives, some of the behavior surrounding these gatherings is difficult to justify. That's putting it mildly. So the party should not have happened. We already know that. The question is, who takes the blame? Let's tell you what Sue Gray says. There were failures of leadership and judgment by different parts of Number 10 and the Cabinet Office at different times. Some of the events should not have been allowed to take place. Other events should not have been allowed to develop as they did. Failure of leadership, she says. Again, we already know that. Sue Gray's report does not reveal anything new. It only reaffirms what we already knew. 1, Boris Johnson could not control his staff. 2, he himself violated the rules. And 3, he tried to cover it up. The next question is, what will be the consequences? The entire opposition and some within his own party are on the attack. Listen to this.
Rather than come clean, every step of the way, he's insulted the public's intelligence. And now he's finally fallen back on his usual excuse. It's everybody's fault but his. They go, he stays.
What the Gray report does show is that Number 10 Downing Street was not observing the regulations they had imposed on members of the public. So either my right honourable friend had not read the rules, or didn't understand what they meant, and others around him, or they didn't think the rules applied to Number 10. Which was it?
Sharp words, especially coming from a former Tory Prime Minister. But Boris Johnson has no plans to resign. He's betting on those magic words. Sorry, let me fix it.
I will address its findings in this statement, but firstly I want to say sorry. And I'm sorry for the things we simply didn't get right, and also sorry for the way that this matter has been handled. And it's no use saying that this or that was within the rules, and it's no use saying that people were working hard.
Saying sorry so many times reminds me of Mark Zuckerberg. The British public is losing patience with Prime Minister Boris Johnson. They're frustrated, and that frustration can be seen in the newspapers. Let me show you how they covered the Sue Gray report. Here's what the Mirror carried. Zero shame, they said. The Metro called it a failure of leadership. iNews said PM pleads for his job. How much more bad press can the Prime Minister take? So far, he's been stubborn, but the next step could seal his fate. You see, Sue Gray is not the only one investigating this. The British police are also on the job. Sue Gray has given them 300 photographs, 300, and 500 pages of documents. What do they show? Pictures of the lockdown parties, CCTV footage of people entering Downing Street. That could be the smoking gun. The Prime Minister himself could be questioned by the police. If found guilty, he may be fined or worse, charged with abuse of power. In that case, resignation is his only option. Irrespective of what happens to Boris Johnson, one thing is clear. Downing Street needs a complete overhaul. I'm talking about the entire setup, the staff, the Prime Minister's advisors, the lack of oversight. All of this needs to change. Sue Gray's report does mention these problems. For instance, some of the staff wanted to report these lockdown parties, but they could not because they felt unable to do so. Also, the apparent streak of partying. If there were 16 parties during lockdown, imagine the situation in normal times. Sue Gray's report does talk about this. And I'm quoting again, the excessive consumption of alcohol is not appropriate in a professional workplace at any time. Steps must be taken to ensure that every government department has a clear and robust policy in place covering the consumption of alcohol at the workplace. The verdict is clear. Downing Street is toxic, booze savvy, and drunk on power. It certainly needs to be reformed. But the question is, who reforms it? The man who joined in on the rule breaking or a new Prime Minister? To the Maldives now. In recent weeks, a campaign against India has been gaining traction in Mali. #IndiaOut. Former Prime Minister and pro-China leader Abdullah Yameen is said to be driving these protests. They've been fueled by an unsubstantiated allegation. Protesters say the Maldives wants to hand over an island to the Indian Navy. There is no evidence to back this up. India suspects China and Pakistan to be supporting these protesters. The Maldives is now planning a new law to curb such protests. Here's a report.
The India-Maldives relationship is being tested. For the past 2 years, a nefarious campaign has been casting its shadow. #IndiaOut. In the last 2 years, this hashtag has cropped up every now and then. But recently, it has been gaining traction. The reason is this man, former President Abdullah Yameen, a leader known for his pro-China leanings. Yameen was recently released from house arrest. Since then, he has thrown his weight behind this campaign. Yameen has been discrediting India openly. He was spotted campaigning with this red t-shirt. It says, "India out." It could not get more brazen than this. Abdullah Yameen is conducting a smear campaign against India. Mali feels such protests could damage the relationship. Reports say the ruling Maldives Democratic Party, or the MDP, wants to bring in a law. The title of the bill spells out the problem. The bill to stop all actions that could negatively affect relations established by the Maldives with foreign countries. It is just a draft for now. Here is what it says. If passed, the proposed law could criminalize protests like India Out. The punishments are tough. Violators could face a fine of more than $1,200, 6 months in prison, or a year in house arrest. The bill can be submitted to the country's legislative body, the Majlis, this week. They reconvene on the 3rd of February. The Maldivian government is yet to express its opinion about the bill. But lawmakers from the MDP are coming out in support. The MDP enjoys a comfortable majority. It has 65 seats out of 87 in the parliament. So if the bill comes to the floor, it is certain to pass. The MDP has been concerned about the India Out campaign. Last year, it claimed its supporters were spreading anti-India vitriol. Some lawmakers are deeply concerned about the India Out campaign. The Speaker of the Majlis has written to a parliamentary committee on national security. There is a demand to investigate the India Out campaign. The growing concern only makes the proposed law a necessity. Bureau Report, WION World is One.
In Canada, another campaign is gaining strength, a campaign to remove Justin Trudeau from office. It started off as a protest against vaccine mandates, but thanks to the Canadian Prime Minister's scornful dismissal of the demands, it has snowballed into a resistance against his leadership and his politics. Truckers and farmers, interestingly, have gridlocked Canada's capital, Ottawa. Most of them say they will not leave until Prime Minister Trudeau steps down. Trudeau says he will not be intimidated, come what may. Here's a report.
The Freedom Convoy in Canada is growing in size and strength. It started last weekend as a protest against COVID-19 mandates. Barely 4 days on, it has grown into an indefinite blockade of Ottawa. The busy streets of Canada's capital are now frozen. Thousands of vehicles have descended on the city. Rigs, RVs, trucks, SUVs. They've all gridlocked Ottawa in a bid to quash vaccine mandates. Are their efforts bearing fruit? Not one bit. The Canadian government remains unrelenting. Currently in isolation due to an alleged COVID infection, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has shoved these protesters to the margins. He has declared them a fringe and their views unacceptable. On Tuesday, he further tried to derogate their motives through a series of scornful posts on Twitter. In one tweet, he claimed that Canadians are shocked and disgusted by the protests. In another, he said his government won't be intimidated by the abuses and vandalism.
I want to be very clear. We are not intimidated by those who hurl insults and abuse at small business workers and steal food from the homeless. We won't give in to those who fly racist flags. We won't cave to those who engage in vandalism or dishonor the memory of our veterans. There is no place in our country for threats, violence, or hatred. So to those responsible for this behavior, it needs to stop.
The Canadian media says that the Prime Minister is exaggerating things, that the protests may have shut down businesses, but they have remained largely peaceful. So Trudeau's statements are only fueling public anger further. The movement is no longer just about COVID restrictions. It also seems to be about Justin Trudeau's style of politics. The protesters say they won't leave Ottawa until the Prime Minister is removed from office. Their calls are finding support from notorious anti-vaxxers from all over the world. One of them is former US President Donald Trump.
The Canadian truckers, you've been reading about it, who are resisting bravely these lawless mandates, are doing more to defend American freedom than our own leaders by far. And we want those great Canadian truckers to know that we are with them all the way. They've really shown something.
It's a watershed moment in Canada. These protests are the most drastic on record, and the support they're getting is overwhelming. They run the risk of snowballing into a Black Lives Matter style movement, with truckers and farmers becoming emblems for Canadians who have been worn down due to 2 years of shutdowns, loss of work, and a severe reduction of income. Justin Trudeau's refusal to give them a fair hearing could prove to be very detrimental. Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
I have a situation for you. Imagine this. It is Tuesday evening. You've just returned home after a long day at work, or you've just logged out of your work system. You're finally sitting down with your family for some quality time. You're planning to cook together or watch a movie and order in food. When your phone rings, it's your boss. She wants you to join a virtual meeting immediately. 1 hour later, you're sitting with a page full of notes. You're expected to turn around a presentation or work on a new proposal and hand it over by the next morning. Saying no is not an option. If you do that, your manager will brand you as insincere. Worse, call you a bad worker. So you cancel plans with your family and continue working. How many of you can relate to this? Many, I'm assuming. This is work life in 2022. The thin line between work and life has been blurred. Work has hijacked life. Today, an employee is expected to be available round the clock. Taking calls between meals is normal. Working post office hours is also normal. Most employees have cribbed, some have quit. Countries are now stepping in to ensure an end to this toxic culture. Belgium is the latest. It is offering workers the right to disconnect. Starting today, the 1st of February, Belgian civil servants have the right to not take office calls after work hours. They have the right to ignore work emails when out of office. They have the right to not reply to messages on work groups. What's more, managers will not be allowed to hold any of this against an employee. At least 65,000 government employees will benefit from this new law. They will get back the much-deserved work-life balance. And Belgium is not the first country to legalize the right to disconnect. In 2012, Volkswagen banned certain employees from accessing work emails after office hours. It said the move was aimed at avoiding a burnout. 5 years later, France asked employers to sit down with their employees and discuss their rights, including the right to ignore official phones. Portugal cleaned its corporate culture in the middle of the pandemic. Companies are now fined if they drop a text or send an email to an employee who has signed out for the day. Ireland too has given its citizens the right to switch off from work. Employees cannot be penalised for refusing to work in their free time or on their off days. As we speak, the European Parliament is negotiating whether or not to extend this right, the right to disconnect, to every worker. Ideally, nothing should stop them. Look around. So many employees are suffering because of overworking. So many are burnt out. In the United States, 77% professionals have experienced a burnout. 29% say long hours or working over weekends is the biggest driver for burnout. 1/3 of Indian workers are burnt out. Where is India's right to disconnect? A bill was tabled in 2019. 3 years later, we are still working on weekends and long after office hours. Technology is to be blamed for a lot of this, and the existing corporate mindset for the remaining. You see, today our smartphones, our laptops and the apps on them have made it impossible for us to disconnect. Today we are attending conferences from a moving car. We're replying to work messages during dinner dates. In situations like these, how do you define what is a workspace and what is not? Also, how do you define corporate terms like out of office? You and I are never out of office. We get phone calls during vacations, and we are resigned to the fact that all of this may be normal. So how exactly are we planning to protect our personal space with the help of laws? Belgium, for example, has said it will make exceptions for emergency situations. Again, how do you define what's an emergency? I'm not making a case against the right to disconnect. If you ask me, this right is non-negotiable. Work-life balance should not be a privilege. It is a basic right. Institutional structures are welcome to step in and try to protect this right. But framing a law is just the start. For the right to disconnect to become enforceable, we need to change our work culture. We need to respect a co-worker's personal space, redefine sincerity, redefine dedication, even hard work. An employee who does not mind compromising on family time is not a poster boy. In fact, this is the very mindset that we need to change. Until then, legislations are more than welcome. Think about it, write to us. We're wrapping the show, leaving you with Gravitas images. Thanks for watching.